Welcome to your Tea Time Strategy. I'm Terry Miscolci, Director of Instruction for Brown Golf here in Bluffton, South Carolina. Today I'm going to talk about injuries, and in particular an individual who's been watching our site and looking at all of our tips talked about a shoulder injury. And I'm going to go through sometimes what the shoulder will tend to do when it is injured and what the injury is and what direction that the golfer will start to take in order to satisfy the movement of least resistance. So let's step aside and let's go over to the tee deck, and I'll talk about shoulder injuries. Okay, I'm here on the practice tee at Crescent Point, and what I'm going to be talking about is the shoulder and injuries to the shoulder. In this particular case, our viewer mentioned that he had hurt his right shoulder. Now, when you hurt your right shoulder, which in my case is my back shoulder, it tends to take up a position where the swing will move, and rather than go through the normal rotation that takes place in golf, because the shoulder and the hip are designed for rotation. But with the injury, what may begin to happen is as the golfer begins to move, the injury says, whoops, I got to move more up, okay, because it takes the stress off the shoulder, so I tend to move more up. Or the shoulder then, because the shoulder cannot turn, what begins to happen is the body will begin to turn. Now, you'll know that because the shot patterns will tend to be lower and more to the hook side of golf. And the viewer indicated that he was still hitting the ball relatively straight, but he was losing some distance. And if you cannot get the rotation at the beginning, you will tend to lose distance. Now, if that does start to take place, then what begins to happen, you need to take a look at the loft of the golf club and or the shaft of the golf club. Now, of course, if the shoulder, when you begin to move, as you move, the shoulder normally goes through a rotation. But if it's injured, it tends to contract. And once it contracts, to avoid the pain, it pulls the body upward. Now, it does not affect the direction of golf, but it does affect the ball flight. And the ball flight, all of a sudden, the body is pulled upward, or the shoulders are pulled upward, and that tends to bring you more flatter along this angle, which means that the loft of the golf club that you're working with no longer is going to give you the height of the ball. And so unless the shoulder, if you're going to stay with the shoulder and the injury is going to persist, then you do have to take a look at, do I need to change the shaft of the golf club? Because the shaft of the golf club says I need more speed, I need more flex. The loft of the golf club says I need more height. Now, if you've got one of the newer drivers, you can take the driver and you can change it. I would change the loft of the golf club first before changing the shaft of the golf club. But when you start looking at the shaft, remember, you need to know your club head speed so you get the right shaft. So sometimes when the injury comes in the shoulder and or the hip, the rotation doesn't take place according to design, so it always goes a path of least resistance. And so once that begins to happen, if the injury still persists, then we have to take a look at the equipment. And the equipment will help us get through that part where the injury has affected both the distance and the direction of the golf shot. So when we talk injuries, be careful. The only other change that might take place is unintentionally, the golfer will tend to take a look at the ball position, and normally the ball position is played in front of center. So they may have, unannounced, tended to move the ball just a little bit back, and of course when that happens, when you go from here and you move the ball a little bit back, you again change the loft of the golf club that you've been using. So when you have an injury, go to your doctor, find out how to get it better, how to work on its flexibility and its strength. Take care of that before you start fooling around with this. That's your Tea Time strategy for today. I'll talk to you next week, and next week I'm going to talk about speed.